I'm Mr. Beats. I'm here in Boston, Massachusetts at Paul Revere's house. Paul Revere is one of the most famous and beloved Bostonians in history. However, I'm here to tell you, he was overrated. I'm serious. He gets way too much credit for the American Revolution. Today, elementary school kids around the country are taught about the glory of Paul Revere, who warned...
The British are coming! The British are coming!
Well, actually, it's more likely he probably said the redcoats are coming, or the regulars are coming, and thus prepared the patriots to defend themselves at the beginning of the American War of Independence. In reality, Paul Revere's ride wasn't really that crucial, and overall, other American revolutionaries had far more impact than him. Sorry, Paul. But to be fair, he was still an important figure in American history, so let's take a more historical look at his life. Paul Revere was born in Boston's North End sometime in December 1734. His dad, Apollos Rivoire, was a Huguenot silversmith who came to Massachusetts as a refugee after being persecuted in France. He later changed his name to Paul Revere, by the way, and so yeah, Paul had the same name as his dad. His mom, Deborah Hichborn, had deeper roots in Boston as her family had been around for a while. They owned a shipping wharf. So yeah, Paul Revere Jr. was the third of their 12 kids. He went to the North Riding School, but at 13 left to begin training to become a silversmith like his dad. As a teen, he was drawn to the West Church and the controversial Congregationalist minister Jonathan Mayhew, who did not hide his political views during Sunday services. Paul Sr. did not approve of this, by the way. He also got work as a bellringer for another famous Boston church that later became important during the Revolution, the Old North Church. Paul Sr. died when Paul Jr. was 19, and Paul was expected to take over the family business, even though his silversmith training wasn't done yet. But he was resourceful, learning how to make surgical instruments and engraved printing copper plates to make more money. 2 years later, he joined the British Army to fight in the French and Indian War, perhaps also for the money. He returned from the war in the fall of 1756 and resumed working as a silversmith. The next year, he met a woman named Sarah Orne, and they fell in love, getting married in August. They'd eventually have 8 children together. Revere would also eventually end up running his silver shop for 40 years, producing items ranging from simple spoons to intricate tea sets. But when times were tough, like in the years following the French and Indian War, he branched out and got creative with how he made money, making illustrations for books, magazines, business cards, and political cartoons, and he even got into some dentistry. Yep, he cleaned teeth, fastened in false teeth, and sold toothpaste. Revere also quickly got into local politics, especially after the British kept trying to tax everything to pay for the French and Indian War. Yeah, he didn't like that so much. He became a patriot, aka Continental, or American Whig, basically anyone who opposed British rule in the colonies. Revere became a leader in various politically active groups, like the North End Caucus, the Long Room Club, Masonic Lodge of St. Andrew, and the Sons of Liberty. He became friends with fellow patriots like Dr. Joseph Warren, James Otis, John Hancock, and Samuel Adams. In 1770, Revere began delivering messages for the Boston's Committees of Safety, who secretly took control of local government affairs away from royal officials. That same year, he published an engraving of a famous drawing of the Boston Massacre, an incident in which British troops set fire on Bostonians. Yep, this was effective propaganda meant to get folks riled up against the British. In 1773, Revere's wife died while giving birth to their daughter. Later that year, he would marry Rachel Walker. They would also eventually have 8 kids together. Yep, Revere had 16 kids. So basic for back then. 1773 was also the year in which Revere played a big role in helping organize and spreading the word about the Boston Tea Party protest. Also in 1773, he became a messenger for the Massachusetts Committee of Correspondence. He even found time to start a secret group called the Mechanics, aka the Liberty Boys. boys that gathered intel on the movement of British troops and vessels stationed in the Charles River. And it was that group, the mechanics, who discovered the British troops were planning on moving out of Boston on April 18th, 1775. And wouldn't you know it, that's the night he would later become incredibly famous for. It was the night of his midnight ride, baby. Although he only became famous for it because of a poem written in 1860, but more on that later. On April 16th, Revere got word from Dr. Joseph Warren that on the night of April 18th, British troops were headed out of Boston to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock in the town of Lexington, and then onward to the town of Concord to take and destroy weapons and ammunition that Patriots had stockpiled there. At 10 p.m. on the 18th, Revere and William Dawes, a shoemaker, took off to Lexington to warn Adams and Hancock. They took separate routes in case one of them got caught. Revere started his trip crossing the Charles River and then went the remaining way on horseback. At Charlestown Common, the British nearly captured him. Still, he eventually made it to Lexington to warn Adams and Hancock, who ended up fleeing to Woburn. Dawes showed up later, joining Revere and a dude named Samuel Prescott toward Concord. On the way, they encountered British soldiers. Prescott was able to escape, but Revere and Dawes were captured. Believe it or not, I found actual footage of the British with Revere in custody. Here it is.
Here, Paul, have some tea. I ain't drinking that sludge. Well, you're all gonna talk. We know you're one of the mechanics. Where the guns? I ain't saying nothing to you, lobsterback. Suit yourself, but you should know your partner's spilling the beans in the next room over. Wait, Dawes is confessing? Not quite. Oh, it's impossible. You can't crack this nut. Have it your way, Revere, but say goodbye to Rachel, the kids, the silversmithing, or the Vice Admiralty Court's gonna love you. Concord! They're in a barn in Concord! I knew it! And Sam Adams and John Hancock are probably headed to Woburn. Great, let's go. Dr. Warren told me you guys were headed out to Lexington. Okay, thanks, Paul. We got it. Oh, you don't understand. Once I start confessing, I can't stop. There's a signal system using lanterns in the Old North Church. The Moosters are already on their way. I'm wearing ladies' underpants. Wait, what?
Nice. So yeah, the British soldiers interrogated Revere with a gun to his chest, asking where they had kept their ammunition. Revere was not carrying a weapon on him, thankfully. If he had been, they probably would have shot him. Still, they stole his horse, and his famous ride was over. At dawn the next morning, he was in Lexington to personally witness the first shots of the American War of Independence. One of those shots was the shot heard round the world, apparently. But wait just a minute. Back up here. It's actually a myth that Paul Revere's ride was so important to how the battles of Lexington and Concord turned out. You see, most of the patriots in rural Massachusetts were already aware of the British soldiers coming because other riders were sharing the same news.
William, who rode with Revere.
How many letters?
5, fourth letter E.
Dawes.
And don't forget, William Dawes also went to spread the word that the Redcoats were coming. Plus, at least 4 hours passed between when Dawes arrived and the British soldiers. And apparently, General Thomas Gage had never ordered his officers to search for Adams and Hancock. He only sent them to find the weapons and ammunition. Yes, regardless of whether Paul Revere's midnight ride happened or not, the British troops would have still failed to destroy the Patriots' most important weapons in Concord. They still would have encountered local militiamen and thus got in a conflict with them. They still would have completed their withdrawal to Boston, and both sides would have still felt that the other side started the violence. There is no doubt that Paul Revere was courageous that night, but the only reason why nearly every American knows about him today is because of a dang poem. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote the poem called Paul Revere's Ride in 1860. and it was not that historical, with lots of inaccuracies, by the way. Before it was published in 1861, few Americans outside of Boston even knew about Revere. Longfellow almost single-handedly turned Paul Revere into a folk hero. Only after that did you start to see Paul Revere books and collectibles and museums and statues. So what about the rest of his life? Well, he did go on to serve in the American War of Independence. He served as a lieutenant colonel in the Massachusetts State Train of Artillery and commander of Castle Island and Boston Harbor. Revere and his soldiers didn't see much action, actually. When Revere finally did see action, he done messed up. In June 1779, British forces started a fort in what is today Castine, Maine. Revere was part of a group of Americans who had surrounded the British there and easily outnumbered them. However, the Americans failed to attack on time, and a couple months later, enough British reinforcements were there that now forced an American retreat. Massachusetts dismissed Revere from the militia after this, accusing him of cowardice and insubordination, although later he cleared his name of those charges. After the war was over, Revere made lots of money. He operated a hardware store in downtown Boston, and in 1788 opened a foundry. In 1801, he opened the first successful copper rolling mill in all of North America. Meanwhile, his family continued to grow even as he became an old man. In 1811, Revere retired at the age of 76, leaving his copper business in the hands of his son Joseph and two of his grandsons. He lived for 7 more years, staying active in politics until the day of his death, May 10th, 1818. A local newspaper article read, quote, "Seldom has the tomb closed upon a life so honorable and useful." Still though, he was barely a local celebrity at the time, but it's amazing what a poem can do, am I right? And yes, sure, this video is called Paul Revere Was Overrated, and he was overrated, but what a life well lived. And because of the folklore, he is an important figure in American history, even if the American Revolution would have happened mostly the same way without him. I'm sorry, dude. So what do you think? Do you agree with me that Paul Revere was overrated, or am I full of crap? By the way, the reason why I had a beard at the beginning of this video and I don't now is because I filmed that in Boston when I was there back in November, and I'm so glad I finally got to make this video. A special shout out to Mr. Betts from Mr. Betts' class for providing some of the animations for this video. Yeah, it wasn't actual footage. He did a terrific job, as he always does, but be sure to check out his newest video he just released about the Pilgrims over on his channel. Which important figure in American history should I cover next? Let me know, and thanks for watching!